Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be looking at a very solid defense in the Queen's Indian defense. And it starts out with pawn to d4, knight to f6, simple development move trying to control the center, pawn to c4, and pawn to e6 from black. Now a lot of times here you will see players bring their knight to c3. Very good place for this knight and simple development move. But this comes into the Nimzo Indian defense, and a lot of white players don't like to play this because a lot of times they'll have doubled pawns, and even top players, a lot of GMs will try to avoid the Nimzo Indian defense. And so instead of playing knight to c3, they instead play knight to f3. And what this does is you can see a few things. White would really like to control the e4 square. He can't push his pawn forward right away because our knight on f6 sits here and it defends this square. And so he'd really like to play his knight to c3 right away and defend this pawn that he could push forward to e4. But as we talked about before, a lot of players don't like to play the Nimzo Indian defense. So this brings us to the Queen's Indian defense, and this allows black, in this case, to bring his pawn to b6, getting ready to fianchetto his bishop to this b7 square and try to gain access and gain control of these light squares. As you can see here, black already controls this e4 and d5 square with his knight here. And so this is another hypermodern defense where black's really looking to have a very solid defense and at the same time control the center with his minor pieces. Now white does have a few options here, and so we're going to take a look at some of the most popular ones that you will see. But more times than not, the move that you're going to see from white to combat our b6 move is white playing pawn to g3, and he does this because it's very important for him not to just give up these light squares. It's very important for white to at least try and hold them off by means of bishop to g2 eventually. It doesn't have to do that right away, but you really don't want to just concede this entire light square diagonal to black, because that really gives black the opportunity to counterattack anytime he wants to. So this is a very popular move that you will see from white. And now here black actually has two main options. One I prefer, but two that you'll see a lot. And the first one is the old line, and I don't prefer it too much, but you will see a lot of play with it, and that's bishop to b7. This is really more of a passive game. I know he is on this long diagonal and he's trying to control this, but it is passive compared to his second move that we'll talk about here in just a minute. But from here, the light square bishop for white can come to g2, again contesting these light squares that we have here. Black's really trying to hold on to this square on e4. He really doesn't want white to be able to push his pawn to e4 and just have a complete dominant center control here. From here, black can simply bring his bishop to e7. Again, black's playing very passive, but keep in mind there is a lot of variations in the Queen's Indian defense that we'll talk about, that black actually has a lot of options to not play as passive, that he can play a little bit more aggressively. But in this variation, if he does want to just solidify this light squares, then he can bring his bishop to b7 and then bring his bishop to e7, and then both sides are going to castle on the king side. And from here, white's just going to continue his development here with knight to c3. As you can see here now, our bishop coming to b4 as it would in an Nimzo Indian defense, it's really not going to hold down, it's not going to lock down this knight pinned to the king, because the king is castled on the king side. So as you can see right here, fairly normal game that you'll see in the Queen's Indian defense in the old line where the bishop came to b7. The white king is very well protected in this nice little King's Indian defense, if you will, if you're familiar with the King's Indian defense. It's kind of have that defense going on. At the same time, we have our light square bishop is very good, but our king is safe. But really, white has a lot of center control here. So this is an option, so keep this in mind. But the second option is actually bishop to a6, and that's kind of what I want to talk about a little bit more, because that's what I recommend, and I've had a little bit more success with that one myself. So we'll go ahead and get into that. Next variation that I do want to look at is bishop to a6. Now again, the traditional play is bishop to b7, but I actually think that bishop to a6 is a much better move. It definitely is more aggressive. So if you're a more aggressive player like myself, I think that bishop to a6 is going to be a much powerful move. As you can see here, we're attacking this pawn on c4, and white really doesn't have a lot of good options to defend it. He doesn't want to bring his knight to d2. It's not a very good place for his knight. He really wants to bring his knight to c3 eventually. At the same time, he's blocking off his queen, which he does not want to do. If he brings his queen to c2, which you'll see a lot of people want to do, then he's really not paying a lot of attention to this pawn on d4, which right now, since white really is paying attention to these dark squares, he's trying to control the dark squares and not the light squares. With his pawn on d4, his queen is no longer defending it. So from here, white can really try to take advantage of this pawn on d4. Now a lot of people say, Kevin, why can't we just bring our pawn to e3? Simple discovery defense on the c4 pawn. But as you can see here, what's defending this pawn on c4? It's this bishop on f1, and since white played pawn to g3, he really wants to fianchetto his bishop to g2. There's no sense in playing g3 if he's going to have this bishop on f1 defending this pawn, because as soon as he fianchettos, then he's going to have another defender come to defend this c4 pawn. So instead, the most common move that you will see is pawn to b3, and from here, black can play bishop to b4. Now this is very important because before, as we talked about, or knight to c3 is no longer possible from white. But a lot of people, if they get the moves mixed up, instead of bishop to a6, if they bring their bishop to b4 first, now knight to c3 is possible. Now a lot of white players again like to avoid this because they don't like double pawns. But as you can see here, this is a little bit different variation because the pawn here is on b2. So it's very important that we, one, bring out our bishop to a6 to attack this pawn, but also to get this pawn to b3 so it's out of the way. And when we bring our bishop now to b4, then the knight can no longer come to c3, because then we'll just capture it and go up 3 points and just GG white there. So from here, white has two options, and the worst option for him is knight to d2. And this is actually going to be a trap that I'm going to make a video on just here in a minute. But the second move and the best option is to bring his bishop to d2. And so if you are playing as white, this is your best option. If you do see, however, knight coming to d2, make sure you check out the trap video and see what to do there. But for time restraints, I'm going to go ahead and just get into a few other options here. But just keep in mind that what you really want to do is just attack, 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 in my opinion. So I think that a6 really gives you that opportunity. Now you can also bring your pawn to b5 if you really want to. Keep in mind black's options here if you look at it. You really don't want to fianchetto both sides. We can castle on the king side if we want to. Now obviously if he plays his knight to d2, then we're going to lay our trap. But if he brings his bishop to d2, and we want to retreat and bring our bishop back to e7, we can still castle on the king side. We have a lot of counterplay that we can have. We can bring our pawn to c5, we can bring our pawn to d5. If we really wanted to, we could bring our pawn to b5. But as you can see, this is a little bit more aggressive play from black. So black does have some options if he does come to a6. And I've had a lot more success playing as black with a6 than b7. That's partly just because I'm more aggressive than passive, but you can play around with both of them and see what fits you best. So we'll go ahead and take a look at a few more variations. More importantly, if white does not bring his pawn to g3 right away in the beginning. The next variation is the Petrosian variation. It's pawn to a3. As you can see, white's avoiding this pawn to g3, fianchettoing on the king side. And instead, he really wants to bring his knight to c3, but he doesn't want to have to worry about this bishop on b4 pinning down his knight to the king. So instead, he's going to play pawn to a3. Now, a lot of people will say, go ahead, black, and go and fianchetto your bishop and, you know, just play normally. But I'm a very aggressive player, and I like to play aggressive lines. So in this case, I've actually had a lot of success with pawn to c5. Now, a lot of times from here, white will just come down with his pawn to d5. And now we can bring our bishop to a6, attacking this weak point with this pawn on c4. Now if white tries to capture and just comes down, then we're going to take with our f-pawn and take on e6. And as you can see here, this is a little bit different. Eventually we can push our pawn forward with pawn to d5, and we have an extra defender here that we can recapture with. And this is going to be a very aggressive variation in the Queen's Indian defense for black. Once we get our bishop involved and we castle on the king side, this semi-open f-file is going to be very good for our rook. And as you can see here, white has a very solid game, but this is going to be a very aggressive line for black. So if you like to mix things up, if you don't want to just play for a draw and you are playing the Queen's Indian defense, then I do definitely recommend this. And the last variation that we'll talk about real quick is just knight to c3. And from here, black's going to play bishop to b4, and this is the Nimzo Indian defense that you'll see. So I'll make another video on the Nimzo Indian defense, but that's kind of what this is based off of. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure you check out the website, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.